Welcome to Relationship Mastery, a podcast for those who want to learn how to master the art of creating happy, healthy, and loving relationships. Please join me, Adey-Jones, and my co-host, Barry Selby, each Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific for a lively and informative conversation on everything to do with relationships.
Welcome back to another episode of Relationship Mastery. This week we thought we'd dive a little deeper into the origins of our love and dating beliefs and wiring, so to speak. We talked previous episode about narcissism. I mentioned, I think at the end of the episode, that we also look for similar signs or things that we're familiar with in our love and dating choices. The reason being is that we take those on when we're very young. And one of the books I refer to by Bruce Lipton called The Biology of Belief is a great reference book of understanding how we're raised, because, as I like to say, our parents were not given user manuals when we were born. And so we don't have a how-to guide, nor do they, on how to raise a child. Let's just say a lot of interesting things ensue from that point. Dale?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. There's that sort of, generational way of parenting that is just sort of passed down sometimes, and people don't question it, and they call it, this is so interesting, they call it, well, I just intuitively parent. Is it intuition or is it learned habitual behaviors that are
It's how
passed down
my
to them?
parents did it, so that way I'll do the same thing too, because it obviously worked, because I'm all right.
Yeah, exactly. Even though they're completely struggling. I know some people like that. Maybe
I
in
know
my
you
own
do,
family.
yes. So,
But
yeah, after you.
yeah, no, yeah, it's fascinating, and and again, we're going to look at the generational patterns that were passed down, but again, with the understanding, we all know that our parents 100% did the best they could with their level of thinking in the moment and their level of consciousness. I don't think anybody intentionally gets up in the morning and says, I want to be a really bad person today. I want to be the worst mother or father I could possibly be. We're just doing the best we can, and doesn't mean that the best they could do was good enough. That's the other clarifying point here.
Yeah, I mean, because parents don't usually wake up in the morning going, "How can I ruin my child's life today?"
Exactly.
It's not really the way to do things. They may not say, "How can I make my son or daughter's child life even better today?" But they won't usually look at it to be determined to ruin it.
No,
So speak
exactly.
to parents for a second, though. That's one of the things I want to speak into, because, and this is the thing. Yes, absolutely. Our parents did the best they could with what they knew how to do at the time. Ideally, we as their children, and then as parents ourselves, have learned a few things along the way to make us, ideally, in quotes, better parents, because we've learned a few things to make life, love, communication, parenting more successful.
Yeah.
The thing is that if we go back a few generations and say go back to let's just for a start, let's go back before cell phones, Wikipedia, and the internet, which basically means our parents and before.
Mm-hmm.
There were very few things around that we could resource easily on what to deal with a child in crisis or how to be in a relationship that really works. So what happened for most of our parents' generation, and for some of us as well, is we looked to those people who came before us, the adults around us when we're kids, and figure they know what they're doing, so we'll do what they do. We learn by copying. So the way that I remember Bruce Lipton talking about it is the first 4 or 5 years of life, again, we don't have user manuals. So we're watching the adults around us for signs, for clues, for indications of how they communicate, how they express love, how they have relationships. And we start to take that in like a big computer, feeding our data banks with information that goes back into our unconscious mind. And it's stored away there forever. But then somewhere around the 4 or 5 years old, maybe a little later, our frontal cortex starts developing, and our conscious mind, so to speak, comes online. And it's the gatekeeper, because the conscious mind decides what we want to believe and not. It's like, okay, that comes in, that doesn't. Like holding the rope in front of a club. It decides what comes in. The thing that we're not always aware of as adults, or as children for that matter, is that even though we have a discernment now and we're choosing what to believe, we know better, there is at least 4 or 5 years of information in the archives behind that velvet rope that is the beliefs we took in without thinking about it. Whether we thought it's right, wrong, or indifferent, we just go, that's the way it is. That's why we do it. So speaking to hereditary patterns for a moment, we absolutely will find ourselves saying things, doing things, believing things that exactly the same thing as our parents did and their grandparents did. Not even
Mm-hmm.
realizing we're doing it because it's back in the unconscious mind that got implanted when we were so young we didn't think about it. So then our dating and relationship patterns can get really messy, because what happens is, I mean, let me ask a quick question for the audience members. You don't have to answer because we can't obviously hear you tell us, but you consider for yourself, is that when you're in a relationship, have you noticed, they say about, some of the women will marry their fathers. Well, that's almost true, because we tend to find ourselves attracted to patterns that are matching what our parents and grandparents exhibited in their relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So, some examples in a minute, but I know I've been ranting a bit. So, Del, you want to add some input to that?
No, I'm listening intently and agreeing here. Yeah, I completely agree, 100%. And what was also occurring to me as you were saying that, we can also have that sort of reaction where our childhoods could be so traumatic that we actually go, I will never behave like that as a parent. We can actually go against it. But I love your last point that you're just bringing up about us marrying our the partner of, well, it depends. If you're heterosexual, marrying the parent of the opposite sex, and if you're not, then it doesn't matter what gender. But they also say that you also marry the parent that you had the most challenges with too. So sometimes you actually can, even if you're heterosexual, you might marry your mother. So for me, I maybe marry my mother or my father. The other thing I wanted to mention that was really, really eye-opening for me about my patterns of relationship and loving, and we both went to USM, the University of Santa Monica, and got our masters there in spiritual psychology. And it suddenly, I saw so clearly that there was something in me. Because my father was absent, I never met him till I turned 30, and very briefly, just twice at that period. But unless I was in longing, because I longed for him as a child, I just yearned for his love. He lived a couple of miles down the road and never acknowledged me, but I yearned for that love. And so my wiring got so crossed in love. If I didn't have that ache, if I wasn't, yearning is the only word I can really put, longing, yearning, aching. If I didn't experience that, I didn't think I was in love. I mean, that's absolute insanity now when I see it. But those feelings, I would dismiss anything else if those three feelings weren't present. Talk about a habit or a pattern that was handed down to me,
And the spectrum is so wide about what we associate with love because of our upbringings and our parents. And one of the things I want to say is that when you get to understand what that is and you start to change the wiring and you end that pattern, you can actually end genetic patterns that go back generations in your own family, because you just realize that no longer works for you. But the thing is, the things we do, I mean, I had a couple of easy ones. I was in a family dynamic where we never argued. There's no arguments in our family. We kept things like down. We kept things very smooth. And so there was never any upset. And frankly, for me, the joy of that was there were never any arguments. There was no any upset. It was always like even keeled. But anytime I was in a relationship with somebody, whether it's friendship or romantic relationship, if they raised their voice or got upset with me, I would just quit and leave. Like my brother is married to an Italian woman, and their family is very expressive, and they raise their voice a lot. And so he had to learn to adapt to that, because that wasn't something that I believe, because again, I don't know him personally. But I know if I was around people like that, I've learned how now when people raise their voices, it's not a scary thing. It's not a bad thing. It's not a non-loving thing. Because again, the environment I was raised in, raised voices wasn't part of the makeup. So loving was quiet in a sense. It was nice. It was delicate in a sense, because that was the way my family expressed it. Coming from an English, Jewish, reserved background, we weren't exactly very expressive anyway. But raising voices just pushes it outside the framework of what loving really was.
Wow, that's beautiful. What a lovely foundation. No, mine was a lot of screaming, shouting, absence. Yes, definitely not a beautiful, quiet expression of love. But yeah, it's amazing. I'm reflecting back here. Did you, when I was at USM, we did one of those, I think it was I think it was John Bradshaw wrote the book, but it was about the sort of genealogy of generation and generation and generational patterns. That was a project we had to do when I was there. I was wondering, did you ever do that project?
I think I remember it from USM. Yeah, I remember doing the healing of memories with family dynamics, and I did my relationship projects with both my parents. Thankfully, so I did second year twice.
Yes.
The hierarchy and we did do the lineage. I remember doing the lineage chart, which is the whole family generational pattern. So yes, I do remember that now.
So we did the project where we had to sort of go back like 3 generations and then go if we had children and things like that. And we all got to identify certain patterns that flowed from one generation to the next. Some of it was sort of like maybe alcoholism or drug addiction or sort of any mental health issues and things like that. And it was quite fascinating. In my family, it was going back generations, illegitimacy. It was just a pattern that followed down and down. And it was amazing. I mean, I remember the comment I got next to the grade was, wow, so something like that. But it's just, marriage has never been an important thing for me. I'm glad I did get married to, as I raised my children. So I gave them that security, but it was never something that was important to me. And I really see that was a generational thing. It wasn't important to my great grandmother, my grandmother, my mother, myself, and some of my siblings. So it's fascinating how these unconscious biases just go down from generation to generation. So I'm curious, what are some of yours, Barry?
Well, the thing actually that I remember now, because again, it was 4 years ago I took this program, but one of the things I remember vividly, and I know I had a big argument with my dad about this, I look back at the lineage of my family and go back a few generations, and my great grandparents came over from Eastern Europe to England. So my grandparents, my parents, and myself, my generation, were born in England. So I didn't know beyond my great grandparents what the lineage was, because there was no records we could find back that far. But I did notice, though, and I looked at this as a definite telling sign, is the name changes. My great grandparents' last name, my grandparents' last name, my parents' last names changed. Right? They changed their names. It wasn't just like they married and changed their name that way. No.
Yeah.
My father's name before it was Selby, which is my last name, was Solomon's, which is my paternal grandfather's name. My paternal grandmother's name was Lewis, which was changed from Levy. My mother's maiden name was Carson, which was changed from Cohen. So what I was aware of is that, and I took it this way, which is way more inaccurate, but I took under the belief system that my family was attempting to be more integrated into English society by changing their names to very English names, because my last name is actually taken from the name of a city in Yorkshire, so it's a very English name. But the thing is that I took it, though, and this is where I had an argument with my dad about this when he was still alive, is it felt like my family's heritage was some point of shame. There was a feeling of not owning our true nation. Now, I understand this is going back, before the Second World War, well before that. So the respect for Jews in Europe wasn't very high. So I understand there may have been a self-preservation need in there as well. But some part of me feels like I almost want to go back to those original names and put them back into my own heritage, because I feel proud of that, even though the journey from there to here wasn't pretty. So, and again, your history, my history are very different. Just illustrate to the listener and to the viewer that your own history has impact on your adult life in some way, shape, or form. I know for myself that I've had a certain distrust of my name at some points in my life, not knowing why. But when I did that lineage chart and look back and go, that name wasn't even my family's name, until 6 years before I was born.
Wow.
So, all the stuff is interesting. Fascinating.
It's fascinating. I know Selby in Yorkshire. So it really is. I'm just and it's sad. It's sad that your parents or your grandparents felt that they needed to change their name to become more assimilated into the British culture. But
Yeah.
I also find it very interesting that even before you really even knew this, there was something about your name that you were sensing, that unconscious part. That I do
Yeah.
believe that not only is it spoken, but I think we without getting too sort of out there, but there's things there's things that we inherit, sort of almost like in our DNA, that we don't even know the logical explanation for, but
Right.
it's so deep within us that we carry in those patterns, we carry forward as well.
Yeah. So, and just was by the other way, just as another thought just hit me. This is something I've not talked about publicly before. I've noticed that when I meet people who've changed their name, I don't mean through marriage. I'm talking about like change their first name or come up with some fancy because they've had a spiritual awakening. They got a spiritual name.
Mm-hmm.
I have a real issue with that, and I realized I'm just tying it together. So I'm realizing that was because I had this thing in my own heritage about not trusting the names that I was having as my own, like in my own lineage. So when
Yeah.
somebody changes their name, they want to. Part of me goes, what are you hiding from?
Mm. Yeah.
But and also just sorry, for those people listening who have done that, let me just say this also clearly. I understand also that our names are given to us we don't give our own names to ourselves. We're given to them by our parents or grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've chosen your own name because you really believe in that, more power to you. Just want to say that clearly. I'm just saying that for me, there was just a sensitivity to that without realizing it for a long time, because I didn't realize my own name wasn't a name that was passed back through generations. So it's amazing what we do discover about ourselves through this process.
Yeah, yeah. And I love what you're noticing there. The fact that sometimes we have a knee-jerk reaction to something, and it has nothing to do with the other person.
Exactly.
It's something that is triggering within us.
Yeah.
So what in your work, what would you say you've noticed are some of the classic traits that are handed down?
Oh, there's a few, to say the least. And sometimes it's so stark, it's almost amazing to me the client doesn't recognize it.
Mm-hmm.
But oftentimes it's more subtle than that. For example, one of my clients had a situation where their parents were divorced when she was young, but the absence of her father started way before the divorce. He was a workaholic and he was never around. And finally, when the divorce happened, it was like he was gone completely. So she would end up dating men who would constantly be distracted. They wouldn't necessarily leave her or desert her, but they wouldn't be present with her. And so she would go through relationships where she felt like she didn't get what she wanted and she didn't know why. And so we started talking about it and discovering what had happened to her father and realizing that was the link that she was still attracting, is the key word, the same result energetically, even though the person who she was with wasn't divorcing her or deserting her, but was internally turning off to her, was just switching, like, playing video games all the time or watching TV or just wasn't with her. Because the thing about these patterns is they don't necessarily a one-for-one match with the previous patterns. Same is true with addictions. The pattern of addiction shows up in different forms, different ways. So even though the father may have been, or the mother may have been alcoholic, the child may not attract alcoholics. They might just find someone's addicted to porn or to work or to anything else. But the cycle's still in there. And so what I've discovered with many clients, and that's just one example, that until they can look back and see the contrast, or should say the mirror with their parent or both parents to their current relationships, it never gets resolved. But once it does get resolved, then the whole dating experience changes for them.
Yeah. And what I find fascinating with that is also is I call it the inner child in us wants a do-over. So we do unconsciously attract an absent parent again, and whatever the reason for that absence, like you said, it could be an addiction issue, or workaholic, or a alcoholic, or whatever the reason why that parent is not there, that we that inner child in us wants a do-over. They want to create exactly this unconsciously, but create exactly the same situation, and this time they're going to get what they want. They're going to win that person over. They're going to change them. They're going to have that intimacy that they crave for. That's one thing I think is very important to recognize. And the other thing, and this is a huge subject, and I'd love to do a completely full show on this, but I find it really amazing how many people claim they want intimacy. They claim that they're available for intimacy in a relationship. But it's just, there's it's not my fault that everybody I meet is afraid of intimacy. And they don't realize that they're equally afraid of intimacy. Otherwise, they would be with somebody that was available. And I always say, it's like, for those that are listening on the podcast, it's going to be hard to imagine. But say there's like, I've got two hands facing each other and there's 6 inches apart. And what they don't realize is both partners are comfortable with that distance. Now, if one person is walking away, the other one can do the chasing and they go, oh, but see how available I am? See how close I want. But I guarantee the second that other one turns around and starts coming towards them, they'll be bolting. They'll be trying to maintain that distance that's comfortable. Right. And hands up here, that was me for years.
Absolutely.
I realized I needed distance. I was so afraid of being consumed that I was comfortable with the distance. And I would play that game of that thing of thinking I was available. But any available man that came near me, I bolted. I was like, no, give me the unavailable one. I'm more comfortable with that.
Well, that's the thing, you were available in one narrow circumstance, not in all circumstances, which is part of the challenge. Because interesting, what you said there also speaks into both attachment styles and projection, because both of those are cornerstones of the working relationship, the paradigm. Because in attachments, the idea that one of the biggest challenges is when an anxious attachment style comes across an avoidant attachment style. And it's like the push-pull becomes so, well, from an outsider entertaining, but when you're in it, it's not fun.
No. Once you recognize it, again, it's the same thing. Once you understand, once that unconscious programming is exposed and you go, oh my God, I see why I'm doing this. I recognize the patterns I've picked up from whether it's generations or just from within your own childhood. There's so much power in that. And then it does become humorous. I often sort of, it's that sort of like, whoops, here I go again. I see it this time.
I would actually suggest that might be one of the best recognitions that you've done the work, when you can start laughing at yourself and go, oh, I did that again, versus, oh, I did that again.
Exactly. I even have, I think it was it Britney Spears that sung that song, like, whoops, I've done it again or something. I even play that in my head. Not I'm a Britney Spears fan, but I just like to laugh. I just like to laugh at and it's actually sort of congratulating myself on seeing it again. I never get frustrated and think, oh, why is this happening again? Or why am I this? It's just like the satisfaction of being able to see the clarity of recognizing, and as we said, the humor to laugh at ourselves and go, oh God, here I go again. But it is a beautiful thing. And we're human. We're going to constantly fall back into certain patterns, but it is the recognizing of those patterns that helps you, move forward. So
absolutely. And that's the thing, is that this work does have tears as part of the journey, but it also has a lot of laughter as well. And the joyful thing is laughter is probably the best result, because you start to be more gentle with yourself and more lighthearted with yourself, which is a real gift when you can be that place. Because admittedly, a lot of the clients I've worked with, the emotional baggage and the heart-rending wounds they carry can feel almost insurmountable. But the truth is, all the stuff we're talking about, all these things we all talk about, are all manageable, and we can work through them. And truthfully there is light, there is laughter, there is joy on the other side of it. So it's worth the journey to get there. So I just want to encourage anybody watching this and listening to this, is definitely, if you're feeling a bit stuck, get the help that you really want, because the rewards on the other side are so much better than where you are now.
Absolutely. And I always say, if I could do it, you can do it. I mean, I was the poster child for dysfunction when I was younger, and I definitely don't identify with that anymore. So yeah, I totally agree. I think it's nothing is insurmountable. It really isn't. And there's lots of areas where people feel that they can't let go of a past trauma or wound, but there is a way. I mean, I can speak to that in later episodes, but you don't have to be defined by some really horrendous childhood trauma you may have gone through. That does not define you. We are made of infinite potential, and we can rewrite the script of our life at any time we want. So
absolutely, that's the thing. I'll say this one again, so everyone gets this. For the people in the back, say that to people in the back, that what we're going to share in this show and these episodes are going to be seeds that hopefully they will plant, take root in your consciousness, ideas that you'll see for yourself, that you do in fact have the gifts, you do in fact have the worth, you do in fact have the value that you really want to express in relationships, so that any relationship less than that is not the one you have to be stuck with. So you can make changes, you can choose better, and you do deserve the best in life, because frankly, as you said, we are made up of such amazing star-struck wonder that anything's possible. Just do the work.
Yeah, and just to comment, and it doesn't even, it's not work as in heavy work. It is joyful. The more freedom that you will experience freedom. It's incremental sometimes, and sometimes it's in big leaps. But that is so, freedom is such a beautiful feeling, to not be trapped in some past, and the freedom to design your future, and to sort of be open to love again. And I sometimes, some people will say to me, well, how can you be so willing to love again? And it's like, well, number one, I've survived a lot, so I know I'm resilient, and so that just proves to me, why would I live with a closed heart when I can experience love? Because even if something happened, I know I'll survive it. I've survived a lot worse. So I would rather move through life with an open heart, and knowing that I'm incredibly strong and resilient on the inside. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
So,
then. We are done for today. But again, have a wonderful week, and I'll see you here next week, Barry.
Next week. Take care of yourselves.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
We trust you enjoyed this episode and invite you to share this with your friends and loved ones. In fact, please subscribe to our Relationship Mastery podcast. That way you'll get each new episode fresh and shiny as soon as it is released. We'd love to hear from you as well. So go ahead and enter your questions and comments at relationshipmastery.show. Take good care. We will connect with you in our next episode of Relationship Mastery.